$115 million is a heavy price for a secret, yet folks line up to pay it with their lives. None of that mattered, or even existed to me, while I stood shivering in that Grove City graveyard, watching the frozen Ohio soil swallow my grandmother. My reality was a short list. 16 years of age, $68 to my name, and 0 living relatives. The preacher mumbled through his script, standard lines about finding peace and resting forever. But the wind carried it all away before it reached me. My ears tuned out the prayer and locked onto the gear grind of the winch, the strain of ropes, and that dull, heavy thud of wood meeting dirt. It was a quiet noise to mark the absolute end of a world. Vera Westbrook took me in when I was barely 3 years old, right after the house fire that killed my parents. A tragedy I was too little to fully process. I only kept shards of memory, like the phantom scent of burning wood that still paralyzes me if it catches me off guard. The sensation of strong hands pulling me out of the black, and the screaming wail of emergency trucks that haunted my sleep for years. A noise that signaled both rescue and ruin. Vera was a retired mail carrier trying to survive on a Social Security check and a pension so thin it barely kept the fridge stocked. Yet she squeezed me into her tiny flat, a place with a broken lift and hallways permanently steeped in old grease and transient lives. For 13 years, she surrendered the only bedroom to me and curled up on the living room sofa. She took off-the-books gigs, scrubbing floors and washing clothes, hustling for cash from neighbors just to keep me in notebooks and buy the occasional trinket from the discount aisle. Not a single gripe ever left her lips, even on days her spine locked up so bad she couldn't stand straight. Even when her knuckles swelled until buttoning a coat was a war, or when she struggled to grip the pen for those meticulous budget lists she scribbled on junk mail. The winter I turned 12 stands out. The boiler quit for 3 weeks straight in January, and the landlord claimed he couldn't get a repair crew out until the holidays passed. Gran bundled me in every quilt we had, forced double layers of, wool socks on my feet, and handed me hot broth, treating those steaming bowls like they were crown jewels. She never voiced her fear or let me see the panic in her eyes about whether we'd survive the freeze. But the thin drywall couldn't hide the sound of that deep, wet cough rattling in her chest all night. I listened to her dark prayers, muffled whispers I couldn't quite catch, but heavy with a desperation that didn't need translation. When the thaw finally came and the radiators clanked back to life, I asked why she hadn't screamed at the management, why she hadn't forced them to fix it, and why she just took the abuse like she took every other hard knock. She gave me that weary, knowing smile, the one that meant class was in session. You can't swing at every pitch, Caleb. You hoard your energy for the fights that count, for the folks who count. The rest, but as I watched her box sink into the Ohio mud, it clicked. I was the one she'd been saving her strength for. Now she was gone, leaving me with a surplus of love she'd poured into me, and absolutely no vessel to pour it back into. The folks who couldn't be bothered to visit while she breathed now dabbed at dry eyes, mumbled script-read sympathies, and retreated to their heated cars to resume their uninterrupted lives. I remained rooted near the pit until the grounds crew started shooting me those "move it along" glances, just guys wanting to bury the box and go on break. So I trudged back to a silent apartment that was already slipping through my fingers, waiting for the other shoe to drop. 3 days later, I was warming a plastic chair at social services, facing a caseworker named Mrs. Darnell. She sported a coffee-stained top, glasses sliding down her nose, and the heavy, practiced pity of someone who's ruined people's days for a living. She laid out the grim menu of choices while thumbing through a manila folder that somehow reduced my whole existence to a few forms. Foster placement is tough at 16, she admitted. Most families are looking for, "I'm on your side here, honey." The unspoken truth was they wanted toddlers, blank slates, not teenagers hardened by 16 years of being broke and broken. Option A was a group facility on the east side, cramming 4 guys to a room until the state kicked me to the curb at 18. Option B was filing for emancipation, legal adulthood, assuming I could prove to a judge I wouldn't starve to death on my own. I fingered the $68 tucked in my pocket, thinking of the minimum wage I earned scrubbing SUVs, and doubted Mrs. Darnell could truly grasp the sheer absurdity of my situation, how the arithmetic refused to balance no matter how hard you prayed over the numbers. Suddenly, she ceased her shuffling. A frown deepened the lines on her forehead as she dredged up a manila folder buried at the base of her stack. She stared at the object for a long beat, shifted her gaze to me, and then looked back at the paper as if questioning its very existence. "This arrived in yesterday's post," she murmured. "Sent by a solicitor out of Lexington, Kentucky. It concerns a bequest." The word tasted foreign, clumsy on my tongue. Inheritance. That was a plot device for cinema millionaires. It belonged to clans with estate planners and mahogany libraries, not to orphans who ate dry cornflakes for supper because the cupboard was bare. Mrs. Darnell slid the package across the laminate surface of her desk. Inside lay a missive from an attorney named Horace Peaton, printed on stationery so heavy and textured it felt like money between my fingers. The legalese was impenetrable, requiring 3 passes to parse, yet the bottom line was dizzyingly straightforward. My grandmother had possessed a sister, Lorraine Hadley, hidden away in the Kentucky sticks, some 90 miles south of the city. A stranger to me, a name never once whispered in our home, entirely absent from my memory. A woman who had passed on 7 months prior, bequeathing me her entire world. 40 acres of soil, a homestead, a barn, generations of Hadley history. With a caveat. I had to appear in person to sign the deed within 45 days, or the bank would auction it off to cover old debts. That deadline ran out in exactly 3 days. I scanned the text 4 times, hoping the ink would reshape itself into something logical. It refused to change. A great aunt I never knew had died alone and gifted me a farm. If I failed to reach Kentucky within the next 72 hours, that future would evaporate. Why did Gran keep her a secret? I asked the heir. Mrs. Darnell gave a slow, sad shake of her head. I can't say, Caleb. Bloodlines are messy. People guard secrets for reasons that feel like survival to them, even if they baffle the rest of us. I reflected on the years Vera and I battled through life in that shoebox apartment, just a pair of survivors against the world. Every time I probed about our kin, she would pivot the conversation or feign deafness. I eventually stopped knocking on doors she clearly wanted bolted shut. But now, the latch on one had clicked open, and on the other side lay the impossible. An exit strategy. I purchased a Greyhound fare that evening, burning cash I needed for food. We rolled out of Columbus at 6 o'clock in the morning, hitting Richmond, Kentucky 8 hours later. The depot was a time capsule from the 1970s. It featured faux wood on the walls, seats screwed into the floor, and a vending machine hawking snacks that had likely turned to dust years ago. The coach was ghostly quiet at that hour. A handful of souls dotted the aisle, either unconscious or scrolling through screens with that hollow look of folks traveling to places they dreaded. I claimed a spot in the rear, pressing my skull against the chilled glass as Ohio faded into the distance, mile by mile. Near the state line, an elderly woman took the seat across from me. She wore her silver hair in a tight knot, and her hands bore the weathered map of a lifetime of labor. She studied me for a beat, then another, before finally breaking the silence. You running away from trouble, son? Or running toward it? I lacked an answer for either. Perhaps it was neither. I was simply in motion. I felt the pressure of the clock. At my age, every day felt stolen, because freezing in place was no longer an option. It was a trap. I honestly don't know, I confessed. I suppose I'll figure it out when the wheels stop turning. She nodded with the gravity of someone who had collected that same reply from 100 drifters on 100 different routes. Well, she sighed, relaxing into the upholstery. Sometimes that is the only method to discover where your roots really lie. You just keep rolling until something compels you to hit the brakes. Moments later, she was out, breathing in a soft rhythm. I remained vigilant the entire trip, witnessing the terrain shift from slate-flat plains to undulating verdant hills, defying the December chill, pondering her words. Something that makes you stop. I didn't realize then, but I was 8 hours away from colliding with exactly that thing. Stepping off the bus, the atmosphere hit me different. It lacked the sting of smog and pavement, carrying instead the scent of damp soil and ancient growth I couldn't quite identify. Even for winter, the December air here had a sharper bite, a clean, piercing cold that sliced right through my denim jacket, as if to point out just how unprepared I was for this reality. The attorney had left the keys at a realty office on Main Street in a quiet little town called Berea. I had to walk the distance. A taxi wasn't in the budget, tracing the route I'd scrawled on the back of my bus ticket, shuffling past storefronts that seemed frozen in a bygone era, solid brick facades flying American flags, and hand-painted lettering on the glass, boasting of family trades kept alive for generations. The woman managing the front desk was in her 50s, sporting a short gray cut and reading glasses that instantly reminded me of Mrs. Darnell. She gave me that specific look adults reserve for unaccompanied teenagers. The one that says they know there's a sad story there, but they're too polite to pry. "You must be the Hadley boy," she stated. I simply nodded. Correcting her felt like a heavy lift I couldn't manage. My birth certificate said Caleb Westbrook, but Hadley was the thread tying me to this zip code, to an aunt I'd never met, and to the inheritance I was about to inspect. She slid a manila envelope across the desk containing 2 T's, one brass and softened by decades of thumbs, the other silver and sharp, likely meant for a padlock. A printed map accompanied the keys. "It's about a 20-minute drive," she told me. "The pavement gets rough after you leave the highway." Lorraine let things slide near the end. She quit coming to town about 6 years ago. Sheriff went out there when the postman noticed the mail stacking up, and the neighbors finally rang it in. Questions burned in my chest. How did she go? Was she in pain? Did she even know I existed? But the words caught in my throat. I murmured a quiet thank you and stepped back out into the gray afternoon. 20 minutes behind the wheel translates to a whole different reality when you're on foot. I hiked for over an hour, the straps of my pack digging in, trudging along a 2-lane stretch bordered by naked tobacco stalks and rail fences that stretched into infinity. Every now and then a car swept by, faces turning to gawk with mild curiosity, but never slowing down. I kept my gaze fixed on the asphalt, focusing on the rhythm of one boot after the other. Momentum was the only thing I had. The turnoff appeared out of nowhere, a gravel track vanishing into a thicket of trees that wove together like a gray skeleton tunnel. No mailbox, no marker, just a break in the fence line and ruts carved deep into the earth by years of coming and going. I took that path in silence, the only sounds being the crunch of gravel under my soles and the distant caw of crows. The paper said 2 miles. In the dying light of the afternoon, it felt more like 20. Then the woods broke, and there it was. The farmhouse sat in the clearing like a Polaroid left on a dashboard for too many summers, washed out and soft at the seams. It was a modest, single-story structure. The white clapboard had surrendered to gray wherever the paint had decided to flake off entirely. The front porch dipped in the center, resembling a weary grin on a face that had witnessed too much hard living. Shutters dangled askew. The roof was shedding shingles, and a blue tarp, stapled down ages ago, whipped and snapped in the winter breeze. About 100 yards back sat a barn that managed to look both sturdier and more brittle than the main house. The red paint had weathered to the color of dried rust. The great doors hung open, gaping like a mouth paused mid-sentence. The whole scene spoke of abandonment, of the slow creep of time when nobody is left to fight it back. I stood in the driveway, where dead brown weeds choked out the gravel, and felt a surge of something unexpected. It wasn't sadness or letdown. It was recognition. The place looked exactly how I felt inside. Wrecked, forgotten, yet stubbornly remaining upright against the odds. I made my way to the porch and jammed the brass key into the lock. The door stuck, forcing me to throw my full weight against it. The hinges shrieked in protest, a metal cry that bounced around the hollow interior. Inside, the air hung heavy with dust and that specific, dense silence you only find in homes where no one has spoken for years. The furniture remained, draped in white sheets that had yellowed and grayed with time. They loomed in the semi-darkness, silent sentinels of a life interrupted, like ghosts caught in the dim light spilling through the dirty panes. A couch, a kitchen table with 2 chairs. A rocking chair sat by the front window, angled toward the lane as if someone had spent a lifetime there, keeping watch for a visitor who never arrived. I peeled back a corner of the fabric to reveal a floral print. The cloth was sound, but it reeked of mothballs and solitude. In the kitchen, a few dishes rested in the drainer, cups and plates arranged with care, washed by hands that intended to put them away tomorrow, but never got the chance. The floor plan was modest, consisting of only 3 rooms, with a central living area that bled seamlessly into the kitchen. A cramped bathroom held a tub scarred by rust, while the mirror above the sink was so de-silvered with age that it fractured my reflection into jagged pieces. Tucked away at the rear sat the bedroom, where the quilt lay under a gray film of dust, yet the corners remained crisp and tight. A perfect military tuck, frozen in time. It was this room that arrested my breath, rooting me to the threshold as I tried to process a sight that defied all logic. Photographs blanketed every inch of the wall space. There were scores, perhaps even hundreds of them, pinned straight into the peeling wallpaper without frames. A sprawling, curated gallery devoted to one solitary obsession: horses. Every last image captured the same animal spirit. A few were professional glossies, immortalizing powerful thoroughbreds standing proud in the winner's circle, their necks heavy with floral garlands. Others were softer, candid moments, animals grazing in pasture, being brushed down, or galloping with manes streaming behind them like wind-whipped banners. Hovering on the periphery of many shots, as if apologizing for her presence, stood a woman I gathered must have been Lorraine. She was lanky and tall, her dark hair streaked with iron gray, dressed perpetually in denim and utility shirts. She never offered a smile to the lens. Instead, her gaze was fixed on the animals with a look I understood instantly, despite never having worn it myself. It was a look of absolute reverence, teetering on the edge of worship. I lost 20 minutes just scanning those walls, trying to piece together this stranger's life, wondering why my grandmother kept her a secret, and what drives a person to surround themselves with beasts instead of kin. That was when it caught my eye. Nestled near the closet frame hung a picture that stood apart, a larger print on heavy stock that had yellowed with time, but held its clarity. The image featured a colossal chestnut stallion with a striking white blaze, his musculature chiseled like marble, frozen mid-gallop, with all 4 hooves airborne in a moment of impossible flight. A handwritten caption scrawled across the bottom margin in ink that had turned from blue to slate gray over the years read, "Big Red, Belmont Stakes, 1973. I was no racing aficionado, yet even I recognized the legend. The world knew him. Secretariat, the titan that claimed victory by 31 lengths, setting a record that remains unbroken to this day. It is the footage they still loop on sports networks whenever the Triple Crown rolls around, the undisputed king of the track. But why did my aunt display his portrait in her private quarters like a holy relic? I remained there for a long beat, searching the grain of the photo for answers, before finally turning away to inspect the grounds. The barn loomed larger than I had anticipated, the roof soaring, high enough to catch the echo of my boots as I stepped into the aisle, greeted by the scent of cured leather, dried timothy, and the unmistakable warmth of living things. Everything was arranged with the meticulous care of a person who had performed the same rituals in the same sequence for half a lifetime. Hand tools rested on pegboards, each one shadowing a permanent marker outline that dictated its rightful place. Dust-moted light fell on racked saddles and hanging bridles, while sacks of grain sat stacked neatly against the far wall. They were 50-pound bags of senior equine formula, stamped with an expiration date merely 2 months past. Only 2 months. That implied a recent presence, someone purchasing stock, Someone keeping things running. My pulse quickened as I ventured further down the breezeway, passing unoccupied stalls bedded down with clean, golden straw. I skirted a tack room where the leather gleamed with fresh oil, finally reaching an unlocked office door at the rear of the structure. The desk inside was submerged under a drift of paper, invoices made out to Lorraine Hadley from clinics, feed stores, and farriers. It took a moment to translate the line items: specialized medical treatment, dietary supplements for the aging, and hoof corrective work. Thousands of dollars poured out over years, perhaps decades. The paper trail stretched back to 1992, but the full story waited within a hardbound ledger. Its pages were filled with a trembling script, the distinct hand I had just seen beneath the stallion's photo in the house. It was a caretaker's log, documenting over 30 years of daily devotion. It cataloged rations, medical checks, shifts in weather, and subtle changes in temperament, all recorded with the hypervigilance of a guardian who missed nothing. The final entry was dated 7 months prior, a mere 2 weeks before the date listed on Lorraine's death certificate. Midnight stiff this morning, delayed breakfast to let him loosen up. Appetite remains strong. He watches the fence line at dusk, still waiting, just as he has every evening for a lifetime. Midnight. The name seemed to vibrate in the silence. The realization hit me with the shock of an ice bath. A horse lived here. Lorraine had tended to this animal until her very last days, and judging by the fresh grain sacks in the corner, someone else had quietly taken up the watch. With the estate still tangled in legal limbo, I abandoned the barn to explore the rear grounds, bypassing a garden that had gone wild with raspberry thickets choking out the old planting beds. I skirted a dilapidated henhouse, its door hanging by a hinge, where dry stalks pushed up through the rusting wire to reach a paddock. The enclosure spanned roughly half an acre, its fencing holding up better than any other structure on the land. And there, tucked away in the deepest shade of an ancient oak at the far edge, stood a solitary horse. My breath caught in my throat. He was a slate hue, the shade of a heavy sky right before a downpour. Though his fur lacked sheen, it wasn't unkempt, and it picked up the fading glow of the late winter day. He held his head low, a posture screaming of exhaustion and longevity, shifting his weight with a caution that suggested simply remaining upright took deliberate focus. Yet when he lifted his gaze to meet mine, his eyes were sharp and lucid, holding a recognition that pierced right through me, a feeling of being truly understood that I hadn't felt since losing my grandmother. He wasn't merely a beast, he was a living testament, a vessel of past days and significance that I couldn't yet comprehend. I moved toward the rail with deliberate slowness, sensing that any quick motion would be an insult. After months of isolation, this soul commanded a respectful advance. The old gelding tracked me with those wise eyes, his ears pricking up in guarded curiosity. As I leaned against the wood, he began to walk my way, placing each hoof with purpose. He navigated the terrain with the ease of someone who had memorized every inch of the soil. It was the turf he had likely trodden his whole existence. It dawned on me that he had paced under that same oak for more than 30 years. Upon reaching me, he dipped his muzzle. He was near enough that the heat of his exhale ghosted against my coat. I could distinguish the individual white strands peppering his slate fur like frost on a boulder, could almost tally the whiskers on his nose. Having never laid hands on an equine before, I was flying blind, so I simply let instinct take over and gently lifted a hand to rest it against his neck. Under his hide, sinew rolled, and I felt the thrum of a heart beating with robust consistency. That pulse had been going since before I was born. Heat seeped into my palm, radiant and intense. "Hey there," I murmured, my throat tight with a sudden swell of feeling. "Name's Caleb. Looks like we're both the leftovers here, aren't we?" He let out a long breath, a sigh that sounded remarkably like consent. A moment of mutual recognition between two isolated souls. He remained statuesque, tolerating my contact with a quiet grace earned over decades, even though the world had given him plenty of cause to be wary. We lingered there for quite a while, just a man and a beast, both abandoned in different senses, both grappling with an uncertain future. Daylight faded at our backs, streaking the horizon with hues of apricot and rose that never seemed to exist back in the city. The old gelding, Midnight, as I'd later learn, shifted his gaze. He watched the light die, just as he must have done every evening of his life. The diary had mentioned he was still waiting. What he waited for was a mystery to me then. But there in the gloaming, with my palm against his coat and the heavy mantle of this legacy resting on my shoulders, I swore an oath without speaking a word. "Whatever it is," I whispered to him, "you won't be doing the waiting by yourself from now on." I need to take a quick break before we dive into the revelation about Midnight's past that flipped my world upside down. If this tale has grabbed you, and you're wondering how this ancient animal links back to a racing legend, or why folks would offer millions for him, I have a small favor to ask. Please click that subscribe button. We're building a library of stories here. Tales of surprise legacies, fresh starts, and the instance where the mundane becomes magical. I guarantee the ending of this one will catch you off guard. I'd love to get your input, too. Did you ever receive an heirloom that altered your perspective on your relatives? It doesn't have to be land or a bank account. Could be a simple note, a snapshot, or a ring. Something that uncovered a secret and permanently changed your worldview. Drop your experiences below. I go through every single comment personally. Our little group grows stronger when we share these moments of realization and change. All right, let's get back to what I uncovered about the old horse. I crashed on the sofa that first evening. The main bedroom, plastered with family photos, felt too personal, like I was violating a sanctuary. The upholstery carried the scent of stale air, detergent, and a faint ghost of lavender that had lost its sweetness years ago. I scavenged the kitchen cupboards and managed to turn up a few tins, just bean soup and some vegetables that had expired 18 months back. I spooned them out cold, too exhausted to wrestle with the stove or check if the gas was even running. It landed like lead in my gut. But it beat starving, and life taught me early on not to turn my nose up at a meal, whatever form it takes. Dawn hadn't quite broken when I headed back out to the pasture. Midnight was already up. He held his ground beneath that old oak, quiet and still as a statue. As I got closer, his ears pricked up, and he walked to the rail with that slow, deliberate gait, acting for all the world like he knew me, like I was exactly who he'd been expecting. "Hey there, old-timer," I whispered. "You made it through the night all right?" He dropped his muzzle against my chest, blowing warm air onto my jacket, and I rested my palm on his neck, watching the horizon bleed into gold while a blizzard of worries started accumulating in my head. Who looks after him now? And what's the price tag on keeping a creature this big fed? Where do these souls go when their people pass on and nobody else steps up to the plate? I went hunting for clarity in the tack room office, picking up the dusty landline receiver to dial the lawyer's number. Horace Payton picked up after 3 rings, sounding heavy, like a man who knew this conversation was coming and wished it wasn't. "Mr. Westbrook," he murmured. "I figured you'd be reaching out soon. You made it out to the farm then?" "I'm here," I confirmed, "and I need to know what's going on." I heard a long exhale on the other end. It was the noise of someone dropping a heavy load. "The gelding is called Midnight," he explained. "He is 35, which is ancient for his kind. Few see 30. There is a vet nearby, a doctor, Naomi Brennan. She stops by a couple of times a week to drop off hay and check his vitals. She bills the estate, but Lorraine's accounts are running on fumes. Maybe enough for another month." My throat went tight. "And then what?" I asked. Peyton let the silence stretch out before replying. "Legally, the animal is considered a fixture of the estate. Claim the inheritance, and you claim him. But you also inherit the liens. Lorraine quit paying the mortgage 3 years back, plus unpaid county taxes. You're looking at roughly $110,000 in debt." The figure punched the wind out of me. $110,000. I had $68 to my name and a gig scrubbing cars that barely covered groceries. "And if I can't cover it?" "Foreclosure auction," Peyton said. "The acreage might sell high enough to satisfy the creditors, but a horse in that condition..." He stopped, and I could practically hear him filtering his next sentence. The compassionate route would likely be to put him down. Put him down. They wanted to end a life just because it was expensive and had outlived its usefulness. Is there any other way? I pressed. The words came out sharper than I meant them to. Peyton hesitated again. When he spoke this time, there was a different note in his voice, maybe curiosity. That depends entirely on what Lorraine left behind in her files, he said, and whether you have the nerve to use it. I'd start digging if I were you, Mr. Westbrook. There are things buried on that farm that folks have been hunting for over 3 decades. Information worth a fortune. The line went dead before I could get another word in. I sat back down in the dusty office and began to read. I lost hours sifting through the chaos. Every filing cabinet, every loose pile on the desk, every cardboard box kicked into a dark corner. Ancient vet reports, feed invoices sorted by year, tax levies, insurance policies, and letters from strangers. Then I pulled a container from the deepest part of the bottom drawer. It was shut tight with tape that had turned brittle and yellow. The black marker scrawl across the lid was faint, but I could still make it out. For emergency only. I didn't hesitate to rip it open. It was full of envelopes, dozens of them, dated only 6 months prior to Lorraine's passing. The return addresses were from heavy hitters: Lexington, Saratoga, Dubai. I went through them by date, watching the language curdle from professional interest to demands, then threats, and finally, desperation. Every single one was chasing the same ghost, the animal standing in my pasture. They talked about DNA, heritage, and breeding permissions. The letters dropped names that forced me to boot up the relic of a computer, waiting on an agonizingly slow connection to tell me just what I was dealing with. The bloodline of Bold Ruler. I appreciate you sticking around for this. Something regal caught my eye. To me, these were just empty titles, but to the authors of these notes, they were clearly sacred text. These monikers carried the weight of a multi-million-dollar empire. You could feel the desperation in the bids. The figures skyrocketed annually. $5,000 back in 1992. By 98, it hit 50 grand. $500,000 in 2005, and a staggering $2 million by 2015. The last correspondence, postmarked just 6 months prior to Lorraine's passing, came from an outfit calling themselves the Thoroughbred Heritage Foundation. They put $12 million on the table. $12 million. I stared at the figure, my brain unable to compute the sheer magnitude of it. That kind of fortune for the elderly gray gelding currently grazing in our backyard paddock? They wanted breeding rights. They wanted genetic access to a stallion they called Midnight's Legacy. He was listed as the verified biological son of the 1973 Triple Crown winner, Secretariat. My vision swam as I tried to process the text. A direct descendant of Big Red himself, Midnight, that fragile old soul with the cautious gait and eyes that seemed to hold centuries. The same animal facing euthanasia simply because the funds to care for him had dried up. To think he was sired by a legend. It was absurd. The pieces just didn't fit. I dug deeper into the pile and unearthed Lorraine's replies, photocopies of her handwritten notes preserved for posterity. She was made of steel. Over 30 years, her stance never softened. Midnight is not on the market. His bloodline ends here. He is to remain here, undisturbed, until his final day. And when that day comes, this soil will be his resting place. Your checkbook means nothing to me. Do not contact me again. They didn't listen, of course. The envelopes kept coming, the sums kept growing, and the tone shifted from polite inquiries to thinly veiled demands. A few even hinted at dragging her into court. Others played the guilt card, waxing poetic about genetic preservation and how the sport owed it to history to salvage this royal bloodline. Lorraine met every plea with silence. Setting the letters aside, I picked up the medical charts. It was a heavy stack, chronicling every moment from his foaling in 1990 to now. Then I saw the birth record, and my breath caught in my throat. Sire, Secretariat. Method, frozen sample, November 1989. Dam, a mare called Twilight Runner, deceased in '92. The signing vet was Dr. Eugene Hadley, Lorraine's late husband. The margins were filled with his scrawl. He had meticulously tracked the foal's growth. He noted the bone structure, the eerie likeness to the famous father, and there, attached to the rear of the file, was the key to the mystery. A letter to his wife, penned just 7 days before his death in '91. It was nothing short of an admission of guilt. My dearest Lorraine, if this reaches you, it means I'm gone. It's time you understood who Midnight really is. I took him. Not the animal, but the spark of life that made him. I was on duty at the stables when the champion passed in '89. I watched them in those last months, harvesting samples for the shareholders who claimed ownership of his genes. I witnessed the toll it took, the endless medical interventions, the anxiety. To them, he was just a biological factory, not a soul who had poured out his heart on the track and earned a quiet retirement. After he passed, I pocketed a single vial. It was marked for destruction, but I slipped it away. I kept it on ice, a secret I shared with no one. Then we lost our boy. When the specialist said our chances of conceiving were 0, I made a choice. I didn't want a trophy horse or a payday. I just wanted to bring something into this world. I needed an anchor, something to nurture so the grief wouldn't swallow me whole. Midnight doesn't exist on paper. The Jockey Club has no record of him. He is a phantom among thoroughbreds, known only to us. The investors have no idea he's out there. If they ever discover him, they will seize him. They'll wring every drop of utility out of him until he's empty. They'll mine him for DNA under the guise of heritage, obliterating his spirit in the process. Promise me you'll hide him, Lorraine. Let him have a calm life. Shield him from those who see dollar signs instead of a heartbeat. He isn't an asset. He's our kin. He's the child fate denied us. I'm so sorry to leave this weight on your shoulders. Yours forever, Eugene. The date scrawled at the bottom was from September 1991. A week after that date, per a yellowed news snippet in the file, Eugene's vehicle plummeted off a ridge in a downpour. The obituary described a heartbreaking mishap, a community mourning a dedicated vet taken before his time. Yet beneath that lay another cutting. A tiny blurb from a local gazette, printed a fortnight after the funeral. A solitary line of text jumped out, marked by a streak of yellow ink that time had nearly washed away. Authorities refused to speak on the crash, noting only that pieces of the puzzle were still missing. The investigation remained open, suspended in silence, never formally concluded. For more than 30 years, the silence held, and the truth stayed buried. Perched in that dim, dust-mote-filled room, I looked around at the accumulated silence of years, and finally grasped the weight of what had been left to me. It wasn't about the land or the aging animal out back. It was a sacred duty that had already swallowed 2 souls whole. Aunt Lorraine had dedicated 30-plus years to shielding Midnight, refusing fortunes that would have bought her a life of luxury, choosing instead to let the fences rot and the bills stack up, while she slowly vanished from the world. She did it. That heavy mantle rested on my shoulders now. By the following morning, the vet arrived. Dr. Naomi Brennan pulled in, her truck rigged with medical gear, and slotted into a space near the stable with the casual grace of a regular visitor. She looked to be in her 50s, sun-touched and gentle-eyed, touching the old stallion in the paddock with hands that knew exactly what they were doing. It was messier than that, of course, but I didn't feel the need to explain. Technically a grandnephew, estranged by a grandmother who acted like Lorraine was a ghost, but the family tree didn't matter now. What counts is his future, I told her. I'm hoping you can guide me there. Naomi? It was a mix of pity and appraisal, weighing whether I was worthy of the truth she'd guarded for 15 years. I've been in on Midnight's secret since I took him on as a patient back in 2009, she admitted. Lorraine made me swear to keep quiet. I held my tongue because I knew exactly what was at stake for him. But she's passed on, and the ball is in your court. She traced the lines of the horse's legs, pressing softly on the joints. He's held up incredibly well for an old-timer. Got stiff joints all around and the usual gut trouble you see in seniors. He's going a bit blind, but the ticker is solid. He's breathing easy, and he's still happy to be here. She stopped, gazing at the animal with pure awe. "That heart of his," she whispered. "First time I heard it beat, I checked my equipment for a malfunction. It's massive, nearly double the standard size. It's the X Factor, the same rare gift his father carried, the engine that turned Secretariat into a myth." Midnight swiveled his head at the sound, ears pricked, leaning into her hand. He had the calm demeanor of a creature that had known nothing but kindness. "He might have another 12 months, Naomi added. 2 years, with luck. But at this stage, you count the hours. Lorraine got that. She dedicated the end of her life to ensuring the end of his was tranquil. I brought up the offers, the cash, and the inevitable circus if his location leaked. She let out a breath, propping herself against the rail as the horse chewed the grass. "If the industry confirms who he is," she warned, "Midnight faces a nightmare." He'd spend his final days in a lab, enduring biopsies and extraction procedures. They'd frame it as saving history or honoring the legend, but it's just greed disguised as science. He deserves a pasture, not a clinic. Her tone turned steel cold. His line would generate a fortune. They could sell his frozen legacy for 50 years after he's in the ground. He stops being a horse to them. He becomes an oil well to be pumped dry. She pierced me with a gaze that allowed no evasion. Lorraine went to her grave shielding him. She picked hardship over a payout, his quiet life over her own ease. Now, you hold the cards. You could ring up the syndicates, sell the rights, and vanish with enough cash to never work again. She hesitated. Or you can stand where she stood. See it through. Let him breathe his last in the only sanctuary he knows. Sleep didn't find me that night. I camped out on the veranda, staring up at a sky so crowded with stars it made my memories of the city's smog feel distant. I chewed on the dilemma. I was just 16, an orphan with empty pockets and a blank map for a future. And fate had just dropped a winning ticket in my lap, worth millions. If I could stomach betraying a soul whose only crime was having the blood of kings in his veins. Logic dictated a single path. Call the foundation. Broker the deal. I could take the cash to fund an education and construct a future where I wasn't scraping by like Gran or like Lorraine. A way out of the survival mode I'd known since I was old enough to walk. Yet, observing the old stallion graze against the dying twilight, I considered the true price of pragmatism. It wasn't a financial expense. It was a tax on the soul, a withdrawal from a bank of dignity. It was about defining the man I wanted to be at 16 years old. Gran reared me on scraps but gave me the world, burning herself out to ensure I had a warm bed and pencils for class. A childhood not entirely consumed by want. She never opted for the shortcut. Convenience never won against her code. It turned out Lorraine played by the same rules. Estranged siblings who allowed silence and stubborn pride to erect a 30-year barricade between them. But beneath the silence, they were forged from identical iron. Unyielding, ethical, and tough enough to break rather than bow. Now, I carried their banner. The heir to 2 women, one who molded me with her nearness, the other with her distance, both defined by quiet decisions made in the dark. As for what they'd expect of me, that wasn't even a question. The truth settled in the second my hand brushed the stallion's coat and felt the steady thump of life beneath. Dignity outweighs currency. Oaths beat out dividends. Certain histories demand guardianship, regardless of the toll. I wandered out to the paddock near 12 o'clock. Frost hung in the air, and the constellations burned low and bright. He held his post, ears swiveling at the crunch of my boots. "Hey there," I whispered. "You couldn't sleep either, huh?" He approached with the caution of age, and I hopped the rail to join him. We just existed there together for a good while, my palm resting on his withers, his breath clouding the night. 2 specks under an ancient, unblinking cosmos. Gran's spirit felt heavy right then. I pictured her staring at the ceiling, fretting over utility bills and groceries, terrified she was failing me. Burdens she carried in secret. That resolved it. I stood guard with the horse until the horizon bled into a pale rose. Trudging back to the house to make the call that would define my future, I had my script ready. It took 3 days for him to show up. I was taking inventory in the barn when tires crunched on the gravel. It wasn't the vet's heavy diesel or a neighbor's rusted hauler. This was a purr, sleek, costly, and entirely alien to a homestead that hadn't known wealth in 40 years. Stepping into the light, I spotted a pristine black sedan idling near the porch. A man in his 50s rested against the fender, draped in a suit worth more than the deed to this land. Silver hair slicked back, features sharp and predatory, wearing a smile that looked engineered in a lab. Caleb Westbrook. He stated it like a fact, not an inquiry. I've anticipated this meeting. I halted 10 feet out. My gut screamed to keep a buffer zone. And you are? He straightened up and offered a manicured hand. The movement was fluid, likely rehearsed 1,000 times in front of a glass. Preston Kingsley, Thoroughbred Heritage Foundation. Your aunt and I exchanged quite a bit of mail. The paperwork, I murmured. You're the author. His mouth stretched, but the eyes remained cold. Indeed, Lorraine was difficult. Principled, perhaps, but lacking vision. She never grasped the treasure she harbored, its significance to the industry, or the fortune it represents for you. He pointed a finger at the paddock. Midnight stood rigid, ears pinned back, sensing a threat I couldn't see. That animal, Kingsley said, holds more value than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes. His bloodline is the blueprint for the next 50 years of the sport. He is the final link to a legend, but he is fading. The comment struck me like a physical blow. He's 35, Kingsley pressed. He could drop tomorrow. Maybe you get a year, maybe a week. Hesitation burns his legacy. Every moment you hide him is a theft from history. He encroached on my space, dropping his volume to a conspirator's whisper. $15 million. That is the offer on the table. Cash, today, for the stallion and full rights to his genetic sequence. Put your signature on the line, and the wire transfer clears your bank before close of business tomorrow. You can walk away from this crumbling shack and never lose sleep over a bill for the rest of your life. 15 million. The figure hovered in the humid air between us, suffocating and surreal. And if I refuse? Kingsley's polished grin dimmed just a fraction. It faded just enough to reveal the shark beneath the surface. Then we need to discuss the mortgage your late aunt neglected for 3 years. You are looking at $80,000 in principal owed to the bank, on top of delinquent county taxes. Add another 30 grand there. You are staring down a total debt of $110,000. He opened his palms in a performance of concern. Let's be honest, son. You have no family, no capital, and legally speaking, you do not even have the standing to inherit this mess. Without outside help, the bank seizes this land in 6 months. It hits the auction block, and the next bidder won't be writing checks anywhere near the size of mine. He stepped closer, and I saw the mask slip, revealing something frigid in his gaze. One way or another, Mr. Westbrook, we are leaving with that horse. You just have to decide if you want to be rich or homeless when we do. My eyes drifted over his shoulder to the paddock where Midnight waited by the rail. The old stallion watched us with a terrifying intelligence, ears pinned flat, muscles coiled as if he recognized this specific breed of predator. It felt like he understood the price being haggled over his head. I need time to process this, I managed to say. The smooth, practiced smile snapped back into place. Naturally, I am staying locally in Lexington. Take my card. Ring me when sanity prevails. He slid into his luxury sedan and vanished, leaving only dust and the heavy silence of a fortune hanging over me. I waited until dark to call Horace Peaton, spilling the entire, ugly truth. I told him about the hidden letters, Eugene's admission, Kingsley's threat, and the crushing weight of choosing between a fortune and a vow. It was a choice between my survival and a promise made by strangers to a voiceless animal. Peaton let the silence stretch after I finished. Finally, he spoke. Forget logic. Forget the money. What does your gut say? I want him to stay, I whispered, but I don't see a way out. Leave the logistics to me, Peyton replied softly. There is a narrow path where we honor Lorraine's legacy without bankrupting you, but it demands your absolute trust. And you must be careful who else you let in. Men like Kingsley do not accept defeat, Mr. Westbrook. They only accept temporary delays. They view resistance as a game they are destined to win. Your aunt knew this. She spent 30 years building a fortress to keep them out. Now the watch falls to you. Are you ready to hold the line with everything you have? I looked out the window at midnight, his silhouette framed by the moon under the old oak, staring west as he always did. I am ready, I said. Good, Peyton answered, because the storm is just beginning. If you have followed Caleb's journey this far, I need you to pause and feel the weight of this moment. He is standing at a crossroads few of us ever see. $15 million on one hand, a dying creature and a ghostly promise on the other. Logic screams to take the payout. Start over. Walk away from a burden that wasn't even his to carry. But deep down, you know exactly which path he takes. You can feel the pull, can't you? Because you understand the terrifying beauty of keeping your word when it costs you everything. Do me a favor and subscribe, not for the metrics, but because we are about to witness a tragedy transform into something profound. You won't want to miss where this road leads. Also, talk to me in the comments. When have you had to choose the hard right over the easy wrong? What did that moment reveal about your character? Drop your story below. Let's carry that weight together, because we are all just walking each other home. Now, let me tell you what happened when Preston Kingsley returned to the chessboard. The following 6 weeks tested every ounce of my resolve. Peyton was a machine, burning the midnight oil on calls I wasn't cleared to hear, negotiating with faceless entities about trusts and statutes that went over my head. At the same time, Dr. Brennan became a fixture at the barn. She monitored the stallion's vitals and taught me the rituals Lorraine had perfected, all while Kingsley circled like a vulture. He didn't show his face at the gate again, but his reach extended through aggressive legal packets from the Thoroughbred Heritage Foundation. The letters were dense with legalese, referencing abstract concepts like genetic heritage and the moral obligation to history. They argued that preserving a bloodline of such national importance was a matter of public interest, overriding personal privacy. Peyton was blunt during our calls. They were constructing a narrative to legally compel us to hand over rights to Midnight, whether I consented or not. Is that even possible? I asked. It's a gray area, he admitted. Statutes regarding livestock and genetic material aren't exactly cut and dried. However, Kingsley has deep pockets, a team of attorneys, and infinite patience. Since you're lacking in all 3 departments, we have to outthink him. Peyton's workaround was brilliant because it was so simple. Imagine you don't actually sell the horse, he posited. Suppose you only sold the opportunity. I was confused, so he broke it down further. Lorraine had blocked all breeding attempts because she refused to let him become a product, shielding him from a miserable end inside a sterile clinic, poked and prodded until he died. But is there a way to give the industry the bloodline they crave without breaking your vow to keep him secure? How would that work? I asked. Peyton laid it out with surgical precision. Midnight stays on the farm, period. Every medical exam happens right there, overseen by a vet you trust. If the horse shows even a hint of stress, the deal is off. He spends his remaining days on your soil, and the title never leaves your name. The investors would basically be buying a service, not the soul of the animal. He let that sink in before adding, to get to the only undocumented son of Big Red, they'll sign whatever we put in front of them. Opal Finch dropped by about 2 weeks into the legal back and forth. At 73, her knuckles were swollen from years of work, but her eyes were still bright and mischievous. Naturally, she arrived with a covered dish. It was green bean casserole with mushrooms, the universal currency of sympathy in the country when things get rough. However, the food was just a pretext for what else she was carrying. She handed me a faded snapshot of 2 women posing by the porch. I recognized Lorraine immediately, though she looked vibrant, her hair dark, probably only in her 30s. The woman standing next to her, however, was a stranger to me. That's Vera, Opal said softly. Your grandmother, taken back in 1985, right before she left for good. I couldn't take my eyes off the image. There she was, full of life, standing on the same floorboards I'd been pacing for weeks, and she was beaming. It was a genuine smile, nothing like the weary expression she wore toward the end. What went wrong? I asked. Why did she never come back? Opal glanced sideways at her husband, Harlan. They shared the kind of quiet understanding that only comes from 50 years together. They had a bad break, Harlan finally said, right after Eugene passed. Vera wanted your aunt to pack up and move to Ohio. She thought Lorraine should sell the farm and escape the ghosts. Lorraine wouldn't budge. She insisted she had to stay, claiming she had made a vow to look after something important. Harlan shook his head. At the time, we had no idea what she was talking about. It only made sense once you arrived and the truth started coming out. Vera thought her sister was being an obstinate fool, wasting her life on a dying property. Words were exchanged, the unforgivable kind, and the silence set in. Opal reached across the table and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. More than 30 years without a word, she murmured. Two sisters who adored each other, separated by a secret neither could share. Lorraine always prayed Vera would eventually get it. And Vera, I suspect she prayed she was mistaken. I sat there for a long while, studying the picture. Two women, two different decisions, walking paths that split and never reconnected. My grandmother had erased Lorraine from our history because acknowledging her meant acknowledging her own error. It would have required her to face the guilt of leaving a sister behind. Sometimes we hide the truth not to save others, but to save ourselves. We keep secrets to avoid the crushing weight of our own decisions. The bargaining process dragged on for 6 weeks. For a month and a half, I sat on that porch, phone to my ear, listening to attorneys and stud farm managers. They used sanitized terms like genetic conservation and lineage continuity. But beneath the polish, it was just haggling over the price of a DNA sequence and the privilege of tapping into the final remnants of a legend. Preston Kingsley played his hand in week 4. He arrived without warning, his luxury sedan throwing up a cloud of dust on the gravel driveway. And this time, he wasn't alone. 2 suits shadowed him. They flanked his sides, clutching leather cases likely filled with the paperwork to strip me of my heritage. $18 million, he stated flatly. We transport him to a climate-controlled facility in Lexington for appropriate treatment. Top-tier veterinary care, only the finest. He isn't going anywhere, I replied. Kingsley's grin grew rigid. Let's be practical, Mr. Westbrook. This estate is crumbling. You lack the means to maintain a creature of such worth. We are offering him a superior existence, and you the capital to begin again. Anywhere you choose. He stays put, I said again. That is final. The atmosphere around Kingsley changed. The polished veneer fractured, exposing the icy intent beneath. Then perhaps we need to address the legal realities. Our legal team has analyzed Midnight's origins, the misappropriation of genetic stock from a private breeder, the illicit production of an undocumented thoroughbred. These are grave issues, Mr. Westbrook. Issues that could lead to felony indictments against the Hadley estate and anyone who knowingly profited from or hid these offenses. He encroached on my personal space, his tone dropping. You are the sole owner of a failing property and an animal that is, arguably, living contraband. How long can you withstand the legal barrage I'm prepared to unleash? Panic set in, a jagged shard of ice in my gut. It was the same dread I had known at the graveside, watching my grandmother's coffin disappear into the earth. The terror of total helplessness against overwhelming odds. But then Lorraine came to mind. 30-plus years of rejecting men just like him. Decades of picking hardship over compromise. Over 30 years of guarding a soul that could not guard itself. If she had that strength, I had to find it too. Get off my land, I ordered. Kingsley held my gaze for a long beat. He gave a tight, frigid smile and pivoted toward his vehicle. You have 1 week, he called back. Then we file suit, and take my word for it, Mr. Westbrook, you won't like the aftermath. They motored off. I remained there, trembling, until Dr. Brennan's pickup rolled in 20 minutes later. She discovered me on the porch stairs, face buried in my palms. She did not pry. She simply took a seat next to me and sat in silence until I found my voice. When I spilled everything, Kingsley's ultimatum, the lawsuit, the terror of losing it all before I had even begun, she squeezed my shoulder and shared a truth I will carry forever. Your aunt stood her ground against men of his cloth for more than 30 years. She did it in isolation, broke, without friends, with nobody grasping what she was saving or why, and she never blinked, not once. She gazed out at midnight, watching us from his paddock. But you aren't solitary, Caleb. You don't have to walk this path the way she did. The town rallied in ways I had not foreseen. It began with Opal and Harlan Finch. Once news broke, they arrived at my threshold with far more than covered dishes. Lorraine carried us through the drought of '94, Harlan said. Shared her well when ours failed. Saved our harvest that season. We've been waiting 30 years to return that kindness. They hauled their tractor over the following morning to reclaim the wild pastures, repaired the sagging fence line, and swapped out the rotted porch planks. The story moved through the county like a spark in dead grass. Clyde Buchanan, a retired trainer, motored down from Lexington once Dr. Brennan filled him in. He had spent 40 years in the thoroughbred world, knew exactly what midnight was, and recognized the magnitude of Lorraine's sacrifice. I've witnessed what the breeding business does to prize stallions, he told me. How they wring them dry and toss them aside once the profit runs out. Your aunt rescued this horse from that grinder. Let me help you see it through. He took up residence in the flat above the stables that weekend. He pitched in with Midnight's regimen, schooling me on equine care. His knowledge was vast. Even Peyton went above and beyond. He located Karen Whitfield, an attorney focused on animal welfare. She took my case for free once she heard the whole saga. Kingsley is using bully tactics, she noted at our initial sit-down. He is attempting to frighten you into submission because he knows his claim is fragile. Midnight is a ghost on paper, absent from every official registry. Without your help, his bloodline remains nothing but a rumor. She flashed a smile that was all edges and confidence, a signal that we held the cards now, not them. The deal was finally struck on a biting morning in February, far away from Kingsley and his corporate sharks. They had overplayed their hand, used too much force, and scorched the earth where any partnership might have grown. Instead, Peyton connected us with a breeding co-op in Virginia, smaller than the Heritage Group, but run by folks who valued the horse more than the profit margin. They put $22 million on the table for the exclusive rights to breed with Midnight. But the money came with shackles. Terms Karen described as the most protective, clauses she had ever drafted. The bottom line? Midnight would never step foot off this 40-acre farm. Collections were strictly limited to 2-week intervals, and Dr. Brennan held the kill switch on every procedure. One flinch, one sign of distress, and the operation stops cold. And through it all, I kept 100% ownership of the horse. They were buying access, not the animal, not the land, and certainly not the power, to do anything other than attempt breeding under rules designed to put Midnight's well-being first. I signed the contract on a gray Tuesday in late February. The funds landed in my account before the weekend, $22 million. It was an abstract number, more wealth than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. My first move was to kill the debt. I wired $83,000 to wipe the bank's claim off Lorraine's property for good. Then came the county, $31,000 in back taxes to end the foreclosure threats. After that, I brought the old farmhouse back to life. I hired local crews, men and women who had known Lorraine and couldn't believe the quiet kid had ended up with the keys. They patched the leaking roof, swapped out the rotted porch timber, and ripped out wiring that hadn't been safe for decades, dropping in a new well pump and making the house breathe again for the first time in years. Clyde and I tackled the barn, building a covered ring for stormy days and installing heated troughs. We built a sanctuary worthy of an old king. I went back to the local high school to finish out my junior year, keeping a low profile. To them, I was just the quiet guy who inherited the Hadley place, the one who did. Not talk about the money, or explain why I spent my evenings with a stiff-jointed gray horse who still looked at you like a warrior. And through all the noise and renovation, midnight just kept being midnight, grazing in his paddock, drifting under the shade of the oak, watching the sunset fade, just like he always had. Still waiting. There is a point in every narrative where the ending stops being a mystery. Not because of spoilers, but because you felt the heartbeat of the story, and you know what it's actually about. This wasn't a story about riches. It was about guardianship, about drawing a line in the sand. It was about the legacies we carry that don't fit in a ledger or a bank vault. Before I close the book on Midnight, I want to turn the mic over to you one last time. What have you inherited that shifted your world? Forget the real estate and the cash. I'm talking about the quiet burdens, the moral compass, the vows you keep in the dark. Drop a comment, and if you haven't subscribed, now's the time. Stick around for a minute more. This next part is the soul of it all. When spring broke that first year, I decided to ring Midnight's paddock with blooms. Opal sparked the idea. She arrived with trays of marigolds and zinnias, loud, happy colors. And we spent the morning kneeling in the dirt by the fence. She told me Lorraine used to keep a garden before life ground her down, before every ounce of her strength went into keeping that horse breathing. She said Lorraine would have loved this. We dug in a comfortable silence, smelling of soil and roots, while Midnight supervised from the oak tree, ears pricked. When we stood back, a vibrant band of gold and red and orange hugged the paddock like a sunset grounded on earth. That night, I uncovered an entry in Lorraine's journal from 1994. Planted marigolds today. Eugene always had a soft spot for them. He said they were the only flowers that looked happy to be alive. Midnight ate 3 before I could stop him. I ought to be mad, but I'm not. I read the page twice, stuck somewhere between a laugh and a sob. At sunrise, I found the old horse at the fence, inhaling the scent of the new blooms. "Don't even think about it," I told him. He gave me that wise, timeless look and deliberately bit the head off the nearest flower. I suppose some things just run in the family. The summer heat ushered in the fertility specialists from Virginia. They moved with clinical efficiency, unpacking gear in the stables with the muscle memory of 1,000 repetitions. Yet, Dr. Brennan remained the absolute gatekeeper of that space. She audited every breath the animal took, pausing the work if he labored, and scrubbing the schedule entirely the moment she detected fatigue or anxiety. Naturally, the syndicate proxies protested, citing deadlines and the compounding cost of every wasted hour. But Karen had drafted the paperwork with ironclad precision, leaving zero margin for debate. "His well-being is the only priority," she clarified during a strained call. "That isn't a request. It is the covenant you agreed to." They muttered dissent. They fought. They deployed counsel to scour the document for weak points. They discovered nothing. Over 18 months, we managed 9 successful collections, 9 opportunities for his bloodline to endure into the future, 9 moments where profit margins and external pressure from the greedy meant absolutely nothing. All that counted was an elderly gray stallion enduring our demands, receiving nothing in return but our vow that his final years would be undisturbed. I choose to believe he grasped the situation, that deep within his consciousness, he sensed this was our only method of keeping him safe. That season, Clyde instructed me in horsemanship. Never on Midnight, obviously. He was far too brittle by then. Instead, we borrowed a placid mare from next door named Buttercup, the ideal mount for a novice. And Clyde carved out time every week for me to master the fundamentals. The experience was initially petrifying. The elevation, the sway, the realization that my life hung on the whims of a creature outweighing me by 1,000 pounds. Yet Clyde remained calm, pacing alongside us in the field, teaching me to hold the leather gently and flow in rhythm with the animal rather than fighting her. "They sense your anxiety," he explained. "They detect it in your posture and the cadence of your breath. The secret isn't feigning bravery. It is choosing to trust despite the fear." That wisdom resonated with me for months, contemplating faith, terror, and the decision to lean in when every survival reflex demanded I retreat. It was the very path Lorraine had walked for more than 30 years. She held faith that shielding midnight justified the sacrifice. She believed that eventually, in some way, it would count. She had placed her faith in me before I was born. I refused to fail her. That final winter proved brutal. The chill aggravated Midnight's joints. On certain mornings, the short journey from the stall to water was an agonizing struggle. He moved with fragile deliberation. Dr. Brennan upped his dosage, while Clyde replaced the stairs with gentle inclines. We strove to shrink his universe, making it softer and simpler to traverse. Yet he persevered, eating his rations and maintaining his nightly watch, forever waiting. I once asked Clyde what the animal anticipated. The veteran handler fell silent before replying. "They possess memory," he said. "They recall faces and rhythms in a manner that escapes our comprehension." Lorraine shared that fence line with him at dusk. More than 30 years of sunsets, side by side. Perhaps he expects her return. Then Clyde added in a hush, he might just be waiting for the approval to leave. The thaw arrived prematurely that year, with buds swelling before March. Purple flowers breached the earth near the house. The wind lost its bite, carrying the scent of renewal and shifting seasons. As the temperature climbed, Midnight appeared to revitalize, walking with less stiffness and regaining his appetite. I allowed myself to imagine another summer, perhaps an autumn. One more year of silent friendship. But Dr. Brennan cautioned me against such optimism. "At his stage," she said softly, "they often surge before the finish. It is as if they are hoarding energy for a final departure. Cherish it, but prepare yourself." I attempted to steel myself. I failed. The final morning was flawless. The sky was an open blue, the breeze gentle, and the birds in the old oak sang a celebration of the season. I rose with the sun and headed to the enclosure with his specialized grain, expecting him to greet me at the fence as usual. But the gate stood empty. He lay beneath the oak, flank against the grass, limbs extended and head resting on the earth. The truth hit me before I even crossed the field. I recognized the absolute stillness, the specific texture of the silence, and the way the sun draped over his silver fur like a shroud placed with tenderness. Letting the pail fall, I sprinted. I collapsed next to him, pressing my palm to his neck, seeking the rhythm that had thumped steadily for 35 years. Silence. His eyes were shut tight. The heat was still fading from his flank. He must have slipped away in the gray hours before dawn. Perhaps he was watching the light creep over the horizon. Or maybe he was lost in a dream of tracks he never had the chance to run. Or maybe he was already galloping toward the souls who had cherished him long before I arrived. I remained rooted there for an eternity, palm resting against his throat, weeping openly. The grief crashed over me, a relentless tide threatening to drag me down and hold me under. Dr. Brennan discovered me an hour later. She offered no empty words. She simply lowered herself onto the grass, wrapped an arm around my frame, and witnessed my sorrow until I was empty. "It was his heart," she finally murmured. "That remarkable engine. It simply ceased its rhythm, peacefully, with no struggle and no agony." She brushed a tear from her own cheek. "That is the best end any of us can ask for, Caleb. To fade out softly on familiar ground, held in the thoughts of those who cared." Excavating the earth consumed the entire day. Clyde, the doctor, and I rotated on the shovels. We pierced ground that hadn't seen the sun in ages. The old oak fought us, its roots spanning the underground like distinct arteries, forcing us to hack through the timber just to make headway. Yet the exhaustion felt necessary. We owed him that sweat, that manual labor to carve out a resting spot worthy of his memory. Harlan arrived in the afternoon with his machinery to speed up the earth moving. Hopel appeared shortly after, bearing food and hydration, offering silent nods of solace that required no reply. Dusk fell as we finished. The pit stood 6 feet down and broad enough for a creature who had lived larger than his physical form. Getting him into the earth proved the most grueling task. We rigged a hoist system, moving with a synchronized grace that bordered on the holy. Clyde managed the front. Dr. Brennan took the rear. I stayed at his flank, fingers tangled in his mane one last time, refusing to sever that connection until gravity demanded it. Once he was settled in the clay, I scrambled down into the pit. "Caleb," the doctor whispered, "you don't need to do this." "I absolutely do." I dropped to my knees in the soil next to Midnight. Leaning in, I rested my brow against his neck one final time. I let my grief stain the gray coat that was rapidly losing the day's warmth to the evening chill. "Thank you," I breathed into the silence. "Thank you for allowing me into your life, for teaching me the value of remaining present, for providing a cause greater than my own survival." I lingered until the colors drained from the sky, only moving when Clyde spoke my name softly, extending a calloused hand to hoist me out. Under the first blink of starlight, we covered him. Every spade of dirt hitting the bottom sounded like a vow, a final page turning on a story I wasn't ready to close. When the mound was formed, we circled it in quiet reverence. The doctor spoke briefly. She mentioned resilient hearts and gentle exits and the honor of having known him. Then Clyde recounted the dawn Midnight arrived. He described Eugene's late-night phone call, trembling with a mix of terror and joy. He recalled seeing the colt stand for the first time, knowing instantly that this animal was distinct. Opal recited a verse she'd discovered among Lorraine's belongings, lines about lush fields, calm waters, and spirits galloping endlessly in the hereafter. Then the silence fell to me. I hadn't prepared a speech. I had no eloquent phrases to encompass what Midnight meant to me in our brief season together. So, I simply spoke the raw truth. "I arrived here empty," I said. "No kin, no roof, no direction, and no sense of self. But this animal, this impossible miracle of a creature who defied the odds, he taught me the feeling of being selected, of being desired, of being worth saving." I gazed at the fresh earth where we'd soon set a stone. He was cherished, I told them. That liberated him, but it liberated me too. It let me consider that I might be lovable as well. Silence followed. We stood beneath the constellations, 5 souls around a fresh burial, listening to the phantom rhythm of hooves that would never strike this ground again. And out in the gloom, I swear I heard a soft snort, a final release of breath, a parting bestowal from a being that gave his all and required nothing but the dignity of affection until the end. I didn't leave. I completed my schooling in Berea and sent applications to universities within Kentucky, refusing to stray far from the soil that had healed me. Clyde stayed on to manage the grounds. His devotion to the land rivaled my own. Every twilight found me at the marker, witnessing the day's end just as the old horse and I once did side by side. Before he passed, the breeding program yielded 9 foals, 9 living vessels carrying the blood of a legend into the future. Some were born to run. Others were born to build the line. That distinct fighting spirit wouldn't die with him. It would ripple down through generations, carried in the blood of his offspring. The legend of Midnight was far from over, though it defied every projection the corporate investors had mapped out. His memory lives on in every foal raised with kindness, in stables where well-being trumps the bottom line, and in the shadow of a woman named Lorraine, who turned down $12 million because her conscience wasn't for sale. I took a portion of the estate and channeled it into a silent trust, funding grants for teenagers who were aging out of the system. Young people who felt just as invisible as I once did, convinced the universe didn't give a damn if they woke up tomorrow. I needed to prove them wrong, to show them that rock bottom isn't the end. And sometimes, a lifeline is waiting just out of sight. A sudden windfall, a break they never saw coming, a window cracking open just as the walls seem to close in. The mail still arrives, of course. Requests from reporters hungry for the scoop on Midnight. Writers who connected the dots to Secretariat's lost prince, hiding in plain sight for 30 years. Filmmakers, historians, and ghouls obsessed with the unsolved riddle of Eugene's passing. I sent every single one of them away. This story wasn't a commodity to be packaged for mass consumption. It wasn't a tragic fable or a viral clip for the internet to chew on. It was a sacred silence, a tribute to a couple who valued love over riches, and a 16-year-old drifter who learned that integrity is worth the ruin it might bring. I turned 18 recently. The desk where Lorraine once sat is now buried under university acceptance packets, schools courting me for my grades, and the personal statement I wrote about legacy and found family. The road ahead looks nothing like the bleak path. I stared down back in Columbus, standing over my grandmother's fresh grave. Life has returned to the land. The weeds have retreated, replaced by lush grass, and the barn stands tall again, its spine unbent. The pasture isn't empty either. It houses Evening Star now, a mare Dr. Brennan pulled from a nightmare scenario who just needed a safe harbor to recover. At dusk, I often lean against the rails where midnight used to keep watch, looking west and contemplating the chain of events that anchored me here. Vera, who gave me everything when she had nothing. Great Aunt Lorraine, who lived her entire existence honoring a single vow. Eugene, who committed a crime to save a life. And the horse himself, that magnificent gray beast who taught me that guardianship is a burden worth bearing, regardless of the price tag. As the twilight deepened, I headed inside. The front door no longer sticks. It swings silent and smooth on fresh hinges. The air in the living room carries the scent of lemon oil, brewed coffee, and a feeling I was stranger to for years. Belonging. For 16 years, I was a guest in everyone else's narrative, sleeping in my grandma's room while she took the sofa in a tiny flat, waiting in sterile government lobbies, dozing in bus terminals, existing in the gray zones where no one puts down roots. But this old house, with its groaning timbers and the family portraits still watching from the walls, this is my ground. I didn't buy it, and I didn't earn it. It's mine because strangers loved me enough to ensure I wouldn't be left behind. I settled into the rocker by the window, the one Lorraine favored. My fingers traced the wood, polished smooth by years of worry and waiting, while I watched the mare graze in the fading light. Past her, my gaze settled on the old oak, standing guard over the granite marker that will remain long after we're gone. Perhaps Lorraine stared down this driveway for decades, not just out of fear, but in anticipation. Maybe, in some way, she was waiting for me to show up. I exhaled. A long, slow release of tension I feel like I've carried since birth. Technically, I inherited 40 acres and an aging animal. But in reality, I was given the one thing most people chase until they die. The peace of knowing that when the crossroads appeared, easy riches or hard morals, I didn't flinch. That decision defined me. Not just for the horse, but for the man I am now, and for the legacy I'll eventually hand down to the next soul in need. The wandering is over. I am finally where I belong. Thank you for following this journey to its quiet conclusion. If this narrative touched a nerve, if you felt a stir in your chest watching a boy choose honor over a payout, I have one request. Please subscribe. We're gathering a tribe here. A group that recognizes the best things in this world don't have a price tag. Folks who know that a true legacy isn't about the size of the bank account, but the weight of the heart. At its core, this is about what we hold dear, the stands we take, and the reasons behind them. By subscribing, you help carry these messages to the hearts that are waiting to receive them. I invite you to leave a piece of your own journey in the comments section. Have you ever stood at a crossroads where the easy path and the righteous path went in opposite directions? What did that moment reveal about your true character? Think about the legacy you are building, brick by brick, with every decision you make. Share your reflections below. Let's build a dialogue here that actually means something. Our circle grows stronger through your stories, your lived experiences, and the quiet wisdom you bring to the table. Please hit subscribe, ring the bell, and let's continue walking this path of discovery side by side. I am grateful for your presence. Until we meet again. Greater than, greater than. This narrative goes deeper than wealth, even when the allure of tens of millions of dollars casts a long, seductive shadow. The real heart of the matter is defining who we become when we have to draw the line between profit and our own self-worth. A young boy, growing up with nothing and no parents to guide him, finally catches a break that could set him up for life. Yet in that split second, he realizes that selling out a silent, loyal companion would cost him something far pricier than gold: his very soul and sense of self. That aging animal represents far more than just livestock or a potential payday. It stands as a living testament to vows honored in the dark, to decades of quiet affection and unseen burdens borne together. By shielding this creature, he is keeping the flame alive, honoring the principles entrusted to him by those who are gone. It is about love without strings, the duty to care for the vulnerable, and the unwavering conviction that some treasures have no price tag. We are reminded that a true inheritance isn't measured in acres or bank accounts, but in how we live and the integrity we show when tested. It is the hardest roads we walk that carve out our character, leaving an imprint that outlasts any material possession ever could.